There are some words people say casually, and then there are words people lower their voice for. Juju is one of those words. For some people, it means protection. For others, it means danger. For others, it means manipulation, ritual, fear, or something inherited but never fully explained. And for a lot of outsiders, it has become a catch-all term for anything African, spiritual, and mysterious. Which means before we even ask whether Juju is real, we have to admit that most people are not even asking a clear question. Sometimes the stories that keep this word alive are not dramatic in the way movies would want them to be. They are quieter than that. Someone falls out with a family elder, then a business collapses in a sequence that feels too precise to ignore. Someone stays sick for months, then a ritual is done and the condition changes. Someone swears a promise before witnesses and spends years afraid to break it. Not because they fear the police, but because they fear something older. That kind of fear does not need theater. It already has weight.
That is the part the internet always skips. Everybody wants the aesthetic. Very few people want the burden.
And that burden matters. Because this is not just about whether a modern audience believes. It is about why intelligent, educated, thoughtful people across generations have organized parts of their lives around a system the modern world often dismisses before trying to understand it.
The question is not merely whether a belief is supernatural. The question is whether it shapes real lives. Those are not the same question.
Exactly. And with Juju, that distinction changes everything. Before we can understand the system, we have to deal with the label, because the word Juju has often functioned as a broad outsider term applied to practices observers did not understand. It was never a clean insider term for one unified African spiritual system. It was a word stretched over many realities until it started to blur them together. That blur matters, because under the word Juju, you might find spiritual protection, herbal medicine, divination, charms, ancestral belief, and fear as a social mechanism. Some of these overlap, some do not. Some belong to distinct traditions with their own names, practitioners, logic, and ethics. So if we are being honest, the question, is Juju real, is already messy. Real in what sense? Real as a metaphysical force? Real as a knowledge system? Real as a social structure? Real as a set of effects people experience in their bodies, communities, and decisions? The more carefully you look, the less useful the lazy version of the question becomes.
Basically, one word got handed the assignment of representing an entire continent's complexity and failed magnificently.
And to be fair, no one word could do that. Africa is not one spiritual tradition. What gets grouped under Juju spans distinct systems and communities. The problem is that flattening them into one exotic category repeats the same move outsiders made generations ago, treating complexity as atmosphere. For many believers, though, the term still points to something serious. Not stage magic, not cartoon mysticism. A structured body of inherited knowledge concerning protection, harm, obligation, and consequence. A system with rules, specialists, boundaries, moral weight.
A useful distinction. A system can be misunderstood by the people naming it, and still remain internally coherent to the people living within it.
That sentence alone could save people a lot of confusion. The reason this topic still carries heat is not because it belongs only to the past. It persists because people still live by it. Not everybody in the same way, not with the same language, not with the same confidence. But across communities and across the diaspora, many people still move through life with some recognition that visible events are not the whole story. For some, that means seeking protection before a journey. For others, it means consulting a trusted spiritual specialist in times of conflict, illness, uncertainty, or family breakdown. For others, it means never treating certain promises lightly, because words spoken under ritual weight are not just words. Believers do not usually describe this as theatrical magic. They describe it as reality that modern people have become too arrogant to name. They may speak of ancestral force, spiritual interference, ritual protection, or consequences carried across relationships and family lines. The point is not spectacle. The point is that cause and effect are understood differently inside that worldview.
This is also where modern people get selective. They will keep lucky objects, pray over jobs, speak about bad energy, avoid speaking negativity into existence, and then suddenly become strict materialists the moment an African system enters the room.
That double standard deserves more attention than it gets, because every major culture has built systems for dealing with invisible harm, uncertainty, and the need for protection. The language changes, the objects change, the framing changes, the human me does not. Another thing people outside the culture often misunderstand is coexistence. In many lives, spiritual traditions like these do not always replace Christianity or Islam. They may sit beside them, underneath them, or operate in different layers of meaning. One for salvation, one for protection, one for community, one for crisis. That layering may look contradictory from the outside, but from the inside, it can feel practical and coherent.
Belief systems survive when they continue to answer questions that other systems leave emotionally unresolved.
And that may be part of why Juju remains alive. It still answers questions about vulnerability, betrayal, illness, fate, and protection in ways many people find emotionally complete. Now, skepticism belongs here too. A thoughtful skeptic would say human beings are pattern-seeking, memory-editing creatures. We remember the ritual that seemed to work and forget the times nothing happened. We assign meaning to coincidence. We are vulnerable to confirmation bias. We may even be manipulated by people who understand fear better than ethics. And that concern is not trivial. Systems involving spiritual authority can be abused. Fear can be exploited. Harm can hide under the language of power. A serious conversation cannot pretend those realities do not exist. But then psychology enters and complicates the skeptic's neat little victory lap, because belief itself is not imaginary in its effects. Placebo and nocebo show that the body responds to expectation. Ritual can reduce anxiety and restore a sense of agency. Community beliefs can build a powerful architecture around an individual, shaping behavior, support, fear, interpretation, and outcome. In other words, even if two people disagree about why something works, they may still be describing something that has real consequences.
So the body is sitting there like, I do not care whether you call this spiritual or psychological. I am already responding.
Accurate. When an entire social world shares a framework of harm and protection, that framework becomes consequential. It affects stress, choices, attention, relationships, and recovery. That does not settle metaphysical questions, but it does establish that belief is measurable in outcome.
And that is where the topic becomes much more interesting than the fake versus real binary people love to use. Because maybe the better question is not whether the system can be trapped inside laboratory terms. Maybe the better question is whether it continues to produce real effects in real lives. And on that question, dismissal starts to look less like skepticism and more like laziness. Maybe this is why Juju refuses to disappear. Not because modernity failed completely, but because modernity did not solve the deeper human problems these systems were built to address. People still fear betrayal. People still fear unseen harm. People still want protection. People still need meaning when suffering refuses neat explanation. People still want a way to act when life becomes uncertain and cruel. Systems like Juju do not survive for centuries because they are decorative. They survive because they continue to do something for the people who hold them. That something may be spiritual. It may be psychological. It may be communal. It may be all three at once. And maybe that is the part that makes modern categories feel too small. We like clean boxes. Human beings rarely live inside them.
Which is deeply rude of reality, honestly.
Very rude. Every culture has built some way of engaging what cannot be fully seen or controlled. What changes is the language, the symbol, the ritual object, the institution. What does not change is the need. And maybe what Juju reveals, more than anything else, is that the need never went away. So no, I am not ending this by telling you exactly what to believe. That would be too easy and probably less honest. What I am saying is this. When a word has survived this long, shaped this many lives, carried this much fear, comfort, controversy, and conviction, it deserves more than a joke, more than a stereotype, and more than a rushed dismissal. It deserves the respect of a real question.
Final conclusion. Unresolved, but meaningful.
Exactly. Because maybe the most interesting thing about Juju is not that people still argue over it. Maybe the most interesting thing is that after all this time, people still feel it.